Today we're going to talk about a decision to stay, and I want to start by sharing a story from my life. It's a personal story. So it feels a bit vulnerable to share it. In fact, I had to ask my mom's permission to share it because it involves her. Many chapters ago in our family's story, my mom and dad decided to stay in a marriage where it would have been much easier for them to go. I don't know when things got difficult for them, but it was about the 5th grade for me that I began to realize that something was not right. Like many couples, mom and dad had begun to drift apart, and all of a sudden they found themselves often at odds with each other. I have a memory that I wish I didn't carry. It's of sitting at the top of the stairs, the spindles from the railing right there next to my big sister, and listening to an argument turn into an all-out fight. And it would have been much easier for them to go, but they chose to stay. And if you're somebody that has been divorced, I'm not saying that the only decision is always to stay. Sometimes it might be the right choice to go, but this is just our story. And in our story, for a while there, it didn't look like a matter of when they would get divorced. At least it was my feeling that it was just, when it was going to happen, not if it would happen. But mom and dad, they decided to stay. And you know what they did? They got marital counseling. They saw therapists individually. Dad had a Bible study that turned into a support group that would pray for him. Don't underestimate, friends, what a good church Bible study can do for you. We got one at 9 o'clock here. That's more than just discussing the Word. Your Bible. Anytime. So mom and dad, they did these things and they decided to stay. And several chapters later, they were living within 5 minutes of both of their grown children and all 4 of their grandchildren. Family dinners, which used to be a special occasion, they're always special, but they became a common occasion. And then one night I had dinner with my father and my mother. My wife was out of town. And it was no big deal. He drove me home. But it turned out to be my father's last supper before he was called home to heaven. And because of that decision to stay so many chapters ago, they were together. And on that day, we were able to stay together. And I know it's hard for you to hear this, Mom, but thank you for letting me tell this story. Because there's people here that need to hear it. Because I don't know what it is for you in your life. It might be a relationship. It might be a job. It might be a dream that God has put on your heart that you're striving for. It might be even just like a diet or a decision to improve your health. Or it might be just hanging on to the little bit of health that you have left in the midst of some disease that will take your life, but you're trying to live every day until you die. Whatever it might be today, my hope for you is that you will make a decision to stay when it would be much easier to go, to give up. And one of the things that we know about life is that the decisions we make today will determine the stories we tell tomorrow. This is the big idea we've been tracking with throughout this sermon series. The decisions you make today will determine the stories you tell tomorrow. And God has a story He wants you to tell, and there's a story that you want to be proud to tell. And so, how do we live a story that we want to tell? How do you live a story that you're happy to tell? And we've begun to answer this question first with this scripture, Hebrews 12:2. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. What the writer of Hebrews means by that is allow Jesus to begin to influence your life. Allow Jesus' invitation to approach God directly to become your first step. Start with, God, what is it that you would want from me? God, I need your strength. I need your guidance. I need a vision for this chapter of my life. Allow Jesus to be the author of your story. And when you start with that, then you can move on to a series of decisions. And we've been working through these. There's 4 of them from the sermon series. We started with a decision to start. to start a keystone habit, a thing that if you do that, it will have a cascading effect and create positive momentum in your life. A little thing that can amount to a big thing. Last week we talked about a decision to stop. And one of our very own, one of our young members, Salem, read a riveting poem about her decision to stop trying to be perfect. Because you can't be perfect anyways. And it was stealing life rather than giving life to her. She made a decision to stop. And there's something in your life, I don't know what it is, but I know there's something that you just know that to tell the story you want to tell, it'd just be better if you were to stop. Today we're going to talk about a decision to stay, and next week we're going to talk about a decision to go, because if you are true about trying to follow Jesus Christ, about opening yourself up and letting Jesus be the author of your life, you're going to find that God's going to call you to go. To change jobs, to change locations, to change an attitude, to get outside of your comfort zone. So next week we're going to talk about those pivotal moments when you make a big decision to go. But today, we're going to talk about a decision to stay. And we're going to get at that by looking at the book of Ruth, one of the 2 books of the Bible that's written after the name of a woman. Anybody know the other book that's named after a woman? Esther. Gold stars for all of you. Okay, all right. So Ruth, she is the daughter-in-law of a woman named Naomi. Naomi has 2 sons. One of them's married to Ruth, and the other one is named Orpah. Her daughter-in-law, Orpah. Now, fun fact about the name Orpah, the woman that you all know as Oprah actually was originally named Orpah. Her parents wanted to give her a biblical name. But because people could not pronounce Orpah, it just gravitated to Oprah, and she just went with that. So we have Orpah and went to Oprah. Now, if you know anything about Oprah, she has a company that's called Harpo. And Harpo is simply Orpah spelled backwards. Everybody with me? So this is where it gets complicated. This is important. Now, Oprah, which leads to Harpo, if her real name was actually Orpah, then Harpo actually should have been Hapro. And this has absolutely nothing to do with what we're talking about today, so we're going to move on. Look, said Naomi, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her. Now, what had happened is that Naomi's 2 sons had died. And they live in a patriarchal culture. And so 3 women widowed by themselves is not exactly a good arrangement. There wasn't a Starbucks where they could go get a job at. And so Orpah had decided to go back to her people, which was an understandable thing to do. And Naomi, caring for both of her daughters-in-law, she says to Ruth, hey, go do what your sisters do. Go back to your own people. For there's safety there. There's stability there. But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or turn my back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. You see, Ruth had become connected with Naomi. And when she looked at her situation, and when she looked at her heart was saying, stay, even though it would be much, much easier to go. And so she stays by Naomi's side, and they find themselves working in a field owned by a man named Boaz. And Boaz, being a good man, he realizes that 2 women working in a field without any men to protect them in a patriarchal culture where all sorts of undesirable things happened, that they were not safe. So Boaz starts to lend his favor towards Ruth and Naomi. Boaz puts out a word for nobody to touch them. And why would Boaz do this? Well, Boaz answers it for us. He says, I have been told about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. How you left your father and mother and homeland and came to live with the people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. Boaz had heard about Ruth's decision to stay when it would have been much easier to go. And he was so impressed by this faithfulness that he began to lend his favor and protection on Ruth and Naomi. And if you know the story of Ruth, it turns out that he wins a little bit more than his favor. They end up getting married. And all of a sudden, a hopeless situation becomes full of abundance. And if you know anything about the genealogy of Jesus, you can trace it back to Ruth and Boaz. A woman whose situation was hopeless becomes the ancestor of the hope of the world. And it wasn't because that she knew all this would happen, but she simply listened to her heart. She's like, I'm at a pivotal life circumstance, and it would be much easier to go, but when I really listen to my heart, it's telling me to stay. And God blessed her. There's something in your life that if you start to listen to your heart, it's telling you to stay. And so the first question that you might ask is, what does God want you to want? It looks like this. You pray and you say, God, help me to see your will for my life in this chapter. It might be a health thing. It might be a financial thing. It might be a relational thing. But what is it you want me to want in this chapter? Give me a vision. Begin to be the author of my story. When you start to ask that question, God will start to give you a direction, and then you ask this follow-up question for today, which is, where does God want you to stay? Where does He want you to stay? It might be staying in a job that it'd be much easier for you to go. But when you look into your heart and saying, you know what, sticking it out is the best thing here. It might be staying in a relationship, it'd be much easier to go. But when you look inside your heart and you pray, God is saying, stick it out. It might be staying in a church where it'd be much easier to go. It's part of the history of this church. God says, stick it out. Stay around. Where does God want you to stay? I'm going to invite our brother Don Sandberg up. He's going to share a little bit of his story about a decision to stay.
If I get up here. We'll leave this to it's not on. Pastor Scott asked me to share my story on why we're here at Faith Church, why we're here at Faith Church. Let's tell you, I've been a member or associated with this church and the prior church for 80 years. And that's from day one. And very fortunate, my wife of 58 years joined me at the same time. We've known each other for 80 years. We've all been to the same church for 80 years. So we made that decision to stay. There have been many, many ways we could have left. Several people have left over those 80 years. And I'm not critical of them. They just wanted to leave for different reasons. Some just moved downtown. Some died, different reasons. But along the way, there are many opportunities to leave and not stay. I remember, I think you know, we merged two churches in the early 60s. We had two pastors, and they both urged us during the merger, when we finally merged, there's the opportunity not to stay because people might not feel right. Very, very few people left. We were like nomads. I think we rented 3 different buildings before we had this built. We lost very, very few people. We had an opportunity to lose people the very first time we called a minister. He rejected us after his pastoral sermon, which is just unheard of. It did nothing but unify the church. It unified the church because we said we must stay. This is what God wants us to do. That was about a year after the merge. Then we were lucky to pick up our first minister, and in the next 35 to 40 years, there's really no reason not to stay. We had a beautiful community. We did a lot of things outgoing, outreaching. We built the parsonage. Well, first of all, in 8.5 years, we paid the mortgage off for this church, which was just outstanding. Next, we built the parsonage over here. At the same time, we built a home over in Emmaus Village in Missouri, which is owned by United Church of Christ. It's an adult community. After that, we bought a house down on Perry Street, a rundown house, redid that and gave it away. We were active in 2 Habitat for Humanity programs. So we had a very good community here. We had 2 or 3, 4 pastors. I can't tell you how many. I can tell you who they are. They're on the wall back here. Just to show you what the community was like. Not too soon after or not too late after we paid the church off, we had a need to replace some shingles, do a roof job. We didn't have the dollars, but we just paid the church off. So a member of the congregation said, I will loan you $25,000, and you pay me back so much every month. This was done without a handshake. This was done with a prayer. We did make 2 payments. Then the person said, forget the rest. Forget the balance. That's what the church was made of. And that's what the church is still made of. About 10 to 12 years ago, we hit a very bad snag. We were not serviced well by the pastor that was called, and it wasn't too long between the pastor and a handful of people took control, and it was not a nice affair. Marilyn and I talked an awful lot about, do we leave? What do we do? And we looked at the balance of the people and said, no, they're good people. They have things to share. We have some talents to share. I will tell you, we spent an awful lot of Sundays listening to Robert Schuller and the Crystal Money-Making Cathedral. We didn't want to do that. We wanted to be here. And when we did come here, rather than listen to the sermon, I visualized the first 4 or 5 pastors we had and what their message was. It was always different, a different slant on the same things on how we should live our life. And Pastor Simmons says the same thing. I think he would tell you, he doesn't bring anything new. It's a different slant and a different way of looking at things. But it's how you want to live your life. After about 5 years, he left. We lost some people. In fact, the church was almost divided. We picked up what was called an intentional interim pastor who helped us along. He helped design the 5 ministries we have now. Oh boy. Outreach, stewardship, worship, evangelism, thank you. Nurture. You know this won't be a test or a spelling test for all of this. Anyhow. And then we were fortunate to pick up, to receive a pastor who we dearly loved. And it was less than a year she contracted cancer and died. That was another blast for this church. But we said, no, God wants us to stay here. We want to get this done. We had during that period, we used 2 retired pastors to help us along in their way. It was Pastor Crispin, Pastor Jordan, who Chuck is not here today, because I want to tell you something about Chuck Jordan. Their job was to preach on Sunday, probably a funeral, probably a wedding, and that was about it. But one early 5:30 in the morning, I didn't know there was 2 5:30s in the day. 5:30 in the morning, my boys and I and Marilyn were up at Community North. She was having her knee replaced. And there shows up Chuck Jordan. As you know, he lives over here in Bluff Road by the interstate. He didn't have to come up here, but that's just the kind of people we have here. We really appreciated that. They served us till we had another pastor come to us, and that was all well for a few years, and then things kind of got a little bit sour, if you will. And this year, there was a chance for people to leave, and we decided no one to stay this out. But where are we now? Pastor Scott came with us. We have a good lay leadership in our consistory. We've got a good start. We had, 4 or 5 come up here in our choir. We used to have the choir loft back here filled. I think this is great. 4 or 5. Maybe next week could be 6, 8, whatever. So, it's a good thing to stay. God told us to stay. That's my story. That's it. Stay around for another 80 years. You guys will charge. We're going to not be around too much longer. But you guys keep this place going. Thank you.
Thank you. To close us out, I want to talk to you for a moment about green grass. Because if you make a decision to stay, whether it be a story like Don's story, or a decision to stay in a relationship, or to stay committed to a dream, or to a job, or to your studies, or whatever it might be, you're going to see some grass on the other side that looks much greener. You know that, and I know that. But here's something I found about green grass I think that you all should hear. You may think the grass is greener on the other side, but if you take time to water your own grass, it would be just as green. If you're making the decision to stay, if God is putting that on your heart, know this truth. But let me tell you about how to water your grass. You take faith. Now, this is another one of those moments where you're like, of course, that's what the pastor's supposed to say, but let me break faith down for you just a little bit. Faith is this. It is do what you can do and trust God to do what only God can do. If you're going to make a decision to stay, you need to figure out what it is I can do and what it is only God can do. Figure out the difference between the two and focus on that which you can change. To drill down just a little bit deeper, in any situation, you got 3 things going on. There's you, there's them, wherever they may be, and there's circumstance. Now, the circumstance is beyond your control. You might be able to influence it, but you can't control it. And they are beyond your control as well. You might be able to influence other people, but you can't control them. And what often happens is that we spend all of our time in the red triangle and in the blue triangle, worrying about, fretting over, trying to change that which we cannot change. And we forget about the green triangle. That's you. You can do more than influence you. You can make a decision about you. You can put forth a strategy about you, and you can begin to change you so that you might tell the story you're glad to tell. Do what you know how to do. Trust God to do what only God can do. I opened by telling the story about my folks and their marriage. And later on, after things had gotten much, much better, I was sitting with my dad, and he was telling me about that time. And he said, son, things began to change when I stopped trying to fix the marriage, stopped trying to fix your mother, and started focusing on fixing myself. And you want to talk about a keystone habit, something that you might start? This is something that Dad did that I've tried to implement in my relationship. Dad rode a train home from Chicago to the west suburbs. And it was an hour-long train ride. And there was a certain stop that would trigger him to put his work away, both in terms of his briefcase, but also in his head, and begin to think about my mom and what her day might have been like, and how she might be feeling, about what might be going on when he entered in the door. Because you see, sometimes we come home physically, but we're not home emotionally or mentally. We're still working, we're still fretting, we're still somewhere else. So Dad started to work on himself. He started to change some of his habits. And things didn't get better right away. But the story we're telling today is one where Mom and Dad were still together. Their adult children living 5 minutes away, all their grandchildren within reach. You gotta have faith if you're deciding to stay. Faith means that you might search for the Lord in His strength, continually seeking Him. Because you know that your strength is not enough. And so you got to say every day, Lord, give me some strength, give me some direction. I need something more than what I got. You can do that. Faith might be letting perseverance finish its work so that you will be mature and complete. I tell you what, if you decide to stay, whatever it is, the relationship, the job, the health kit, whatever it might be, and you decide to do that and you do it well today, you'll become more complete, mature, and capable of handling things in the future. So let us not become weary of doing good. For at the proper time, we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Let Paul encourage you to not become weary in doing the thing that in your heart feels like the right thing, even though there's no end in sight, because at the proper time, you will reap a harvest if you don't give up. I don't know what it is for you today, but I believe if you search your heart that there's something that God is calling you to stay. So don't give up. Decide to stay. Let me pray for you. Gracious Lord, I lift up each and every person here. First, that they might open their hearts to you, invite you to be the author of their lives. For God, you have a good story for them to tell. And then, Lord, if they're in a moment right now where they need extra strength so that they may stay when it would be much easier to go, I ask, Lord, that you strengthen them, that you plant them where they are like a tree planted by the water, that they are firm and strong, well-resourced and nurtured by you, so that they might stay. And that years from now, they will tell a story that they are glad to tell, and that glorifies you when it is so. Pray all this in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ.